The Pentagon is genuinely concerned, not just saying it for show. Iran no longer retaliates as a one-time shot, but as a series of steps meant to hurt gradually and in several places at once. The United States has already acknowledged the first casualties, and American security assessments openly count on Iran and its people continuing attacks on American and allied targets in the region, and stepping up in cyberspace as well. And this is exactly the moment when it's worth stopping to look at the map of strikes and start looking at the arsenal. Because even though the United States and Israel have destroyed part of Iran's capabilities and hit the top leadership, Iran has weapons that still work even after losses. In this video, I'll show you why Iran's retaliation is so harsh and which 4 tools can actually cause real harm. Missiles, drones, the few proxies Iran has left, and finally Hormuz, which can bring the war into the global economy. And be careful, the most important thing isn't what Iran did yesterday. The most important thing is what it can do repeatedly. Iran is not playing a game today where it has to militarily defeat Israel or the United States. It is playing a game where it has to make the conflict expensive, uncomfortable, and long. And the first category of weapons used for this most directly are missiles. This chapter is not about technical details for nerds. It's about why missiles work as leverage, even when a large part of them are intercepted by air defense. And with missiles, there is one tricky thing. Even when the defense works, the bill keeps growing. The basic logic is simple. When missiles arrive, the country goes into a mode of sirens, interceptions, flight interruptions, closures, and stress. Even if they don't hit anything, the alarm itself changes the behavior of the state. And if they hit something, even if it's just one hole in the infrastructure, you get headlines, political pressure, and another cycle of escalation. That's exactly why Iran uses missiles as a systemic tool, not as a one-time strike. And what sounds like one night of panic when repeated turns into attrition. Iran's missile arsenal can be divided into 3 layers for the viewer. The first layer consists of short and medium-short range ballistic missiles intended for regional targets. This typically includes the Fateh, Zulfikar, Dezful, or Qiyam families. These missiles are relevant when Iran wants to keep up the pressure on courage in the vicinity of the base, logistics, and infrastructure in the wider region. In practice, this means that more than one country is in the danger zone. There is an entire belt of countries where air forces, ammunition depots, ports, and oil and gas terminals are concentrated. Iran doesn't have to hit a single exact point. It's enough if it spreads the feeling that nothing is completely out of reach. And with this kind of pressure, it's not decided in the split second of the strike, but in what it does to the decisions of states the next day. The second layer is medium-range missiles, which are relevant when putting pressure on Israel. Here, Shahab-3 and its derived versions like Ghadr or Imad are most often mentioned, along with Sajil, which is often associated with solid fuel. From the perspective of the conflict, one thing is important. Solid fuel is usually associated with faster readiness and a smaller window in which the missile can be destroyed before launch. That's exactly what Iran needs if it wants to have retaliation that survives even after the enemy's first strikes. It's not about Iran having some kind of miracle missile. It's about building the capability to have more waves and more attempts. And this is exactly where the question begins. The one the Pentagon will keep asking over and over again. How many more such waves could come? The third layer consists of systems that have greater strategic significance as a symbol of another level of escalation. In this category, Khorramshahr is often mentioned. Such missiles are important even if you don't use them, because in escalation the biggest weapon is often the scale itself. And then the threat that there's still another step. This way, Iran creates room for both blackmail and negotiation, because the opponent can never be sure if they've already seen the maximum. And when you don't know where the maximum is in such a conflict, it's hard to plan both defense and counterattack. Now comes the part that many people don't realize, but it's key to why missiles can cause harm, even without mass strikes. Missiles are a weapon that attacks defense. Every interception costs money and supplies, Every night on alert costs psychological capital. And when it repeats its attrition, Iran doesn't need to be 100% successful in this game. It's enough for them to repeatedly trigger alarms and force the opponent to spend expensive resources on defense. That's the difference between how missiles are talked about in the news and how they work in reality. And this is exactly the principle Iran will rely on if it wants to keep up the pressure without having to take one huge step. And that's exactly the point of this chapter. Missiles aren't just about explosions. They're about turning a conflict into a long bill. But if you want to keep up the pressure for a long time, missiles are still relatively expensive and not ideal. They're not perfect for a permanent marathon, day after day. And this is where the second weapon comes in, which is often even more troublesome in modern conflicts: drones. And here, the situation starts to change. Because with drones, the pressure is cheaper, more persistent, and much more unpleasant psychologically. Drones are exactly what missiles are not for Iran. Missiles are loud, dramatic, politically visible, and relatively expensive. Drones are cheaper, more persistent, and can be used so that the opponent feels the pressure every day, not just during one night. And if Iran's goal is to make the conflict expensive and long, drones are the ideal tool for a marathon. And decisions are often made differently when it comes to drones. Some will get through, but how much will it cost you to stop them? The most important thing about drones isn't that they're technological marvels. The most important thing is that they're changing the economics of defense. When a ballistic missile comes at you, you have to respond. If a swarm of cheaper drones comes at you, you also have to respond. But now the problem isn't just whether something hits. The problem is how much your response costs. Against drones, you often use expensive anti-aircraft missiles, turn on radars, keep crews on alert, and wear down a system that isn't built to be under constant maximum strain for weeks and months. And at that moment, the question that nobody likes to hear becomes important. What if this can be repeated every day? Iran has several types of unmanned vehicles in this area, but for this conflict, two categories are the most important. The first are one-way attack drones, kamikaze drones, which are basically cheap flying munitions. Their point is not centimeter accuracy. Their point is quantity. If you send enough of them, the enemy has to decide what to shoot down with what to let through, where to take risks, and where to waste expensive ammunition. The second category is reconnaissance and strike drones, which can be used for gathering information and attacking softer targets, but mainly to keep the enemy on edge and to show them that their space is not completely sealed off. And it's often in this second category where the problem is hidden. The drone doesn't have to hit anything to make everything start behaving differently. Here's the key difference between missiles and drones. Missiles are a signal. Drones are pressure. Missiles give you one dramatic night. Drones can give you 10 nights after which no one is sure if anything is normal anymore. And this is exactly how you attack the economy and psychology. Airports will begin changing their operations. Security forces tighten measures, costs rise, and investors and insurance companies start to calculate that the risk is not a one-time thing, but permanent. When the risk becomes permanent, the world will no longer function as it did before. Another thing that makes drones dangerous is their combinability. Drones are not used alone. They are used in combination with missiles and electronic jamming so that the defense has to deal with several things at once. One wave of drones can force the defense to turn on their radars and reveal their positions. A second wave can come from another direction and test the gaps. And a third wave can just be a cheap filler meant to tire out the defense. In this way, drone warfare is very pragmatic. It's not about a single precise strike. It's about making the defense make mistakes. And it's exactly the mistakes that make escalation dangerous. And now, an uncomfortable truth. Drones are a weapon that increases the likelihood of incidents, even if no one wants a major escalation. Because a drone can be shot down over a city. Debris can fall on infrastructure. Civilian objects can be damaged. An airport or a port can be shut down, and suddenly you have a problem that no one planned for. This is exactly the mechanism by which conflict spreads, even when everyone officially claims they don't want a big war. And as the conflict spreads, the pressure also increases on those who would rather not get involved. And that's why drones fit perfectly into the Iranian strategy. They allow the pressure to be applied gradually. They allow for creating uncertainty, and they allow keeping the opponent in a costly defensive mode without Iran having to pull the hardest triggers. But even drones have their limits. If you want to keep a conflict going for a long time and spread it across multiple countries at once, technology is not always the best weapon. The best weapon is a network. And here we come to the third tool that Iran has been using for years: proxies, meaning allies and militias through which it can fight remotely and without a clear signature. And here it's crucial that this network is no longer as wide as it used to be, but it can still cause enough damage that no one can afford to ignore it. If we had made this video a few years ago, the chapter about Iranian proxies would have been about a huge network capable of striking simultaneously from Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, and Yemen. But the reality has changed. Hamas has been fundamentally shattered after a long conflict, and Hezbollah is significantly weakened and under heavy pressure, so its ability to open another full-scale front against Israel is much smaller today than it used to be. And after the fall of Assad's regime, Syria stopped acting as a stable base from which regional operations could be comfortably coordinated. That means Iran still has proxies, but its levers are narrower, more concentrated, and more pragmatic. And that's exactly why they're dangerous, because they've been chosen to have the greatest effect. The strongest remaining tool that can really hurt is the Houthis in Yemen. And the reason is simple. The Houthis don't just attack symbols, they attack transportation. At a time when routes are already getting complicated, the sea is exactly the place where a few attacks or threats can turn a conflict into a global tax. That's why, even if the fighting isn't happening in Europe, Europe will feel it in logistics, prices, and risk surcharges. And with this kind of pressure, the worst part is that you can keep it up for a long time, even if you don't want a big front. The second proxy lever that Iran has left are the Shiite militias in Iraq, who are especially capable of striking with drones. Their goal doesn't have to be to destroy huge bases. The goal is to create incidents that force the United States and its partners to move defenses, change protocols, close areas, and maintain the feeling that the conflict can be ignited outside of Iran as well. And even the mere threat that this pressure could shift to American assets in Iraq and the surrounding area forces the United States to stretch its defenses more broadly. Stretching your defenses always weakens something. The point is that Iran no longer has as wide a proxy palette as it used to, but that doesn't mean it's powerless. On the contrary, when its options narrow, it starts to rely on those with the best cost-to-effect ratio. And that effect is uncertainty, which spreads faster than the missiles and drones themselves. And now comes a weapon that surpasses even proxies: Hormuz. Because Hormuz is a place where Iran doesn't have to hit a single military target for things to start happening with tankers, insurance, and prices. And this is the part where a regional crisis can turn into a global bill. Hormuz is Iran's weapon that works, even if Iran doesn't fire a single missile at a city. Because Hormuz is not just a strait on the map, it's a bottleneck through which a huge portion of the world's oil and gas is pushed. And in such a bottleneck, sometimes it's enough for people to start fearing that something might happen. And fear in the markets is often stronger than reality. In this escalation, we've already moved from hypotheses to reality. Iran has declared that the Hormuz Strait is closed and has threatened attacks on ships that try to pass through. This is the strongest signal Iran has sent along these lines in years. Because with this, they are not just speaking to Israel or the United States of America, but to everyone who depends on this route. And at that moment, the behavior of the entire system begins to change. And the result came immediately, exactly as we've seen in the past. It's not that someone has to officially block the entire sea, but that the zone becomes practically impassable because of the turmoil. Reuters writes about the de facto closure of Hormuz, about approximately 150 stranded ships, including tankers and liquefied natural gas carriers, about damaged tankers, and even casualties. This is exactly the moment when the war starts spilling over into the economy, without anyone drawing front lines. And when this happens, the pressure begins to spread elsewhere. And now comes the most important mechanism, which most people completely overlook. Hormuz isn't shut down by someone physically closing it with a chain. Hormuz is shut down by becoming uninsurable. When insurance companies cancel or limit war coverage, a large part of the shipping simply stops because the captain and the ship owner are not suicidal. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Several major P&I clubs and insurance companies have announced the cancellation of war coverage for the area, effective from March 5, and risk surcharges are increasing. In practice, this means that even a ship that could technically pass through suddenly can't, because it would be financially and legally insane. And when insurance starts to change, prices will start to change as well. Iran has more tools here, which it can use depending on how far it wants to go. The toughest version is an open attack on ships, but Iran doesn't even have to do that all the time. A series of incidents, harassment, threats, a few damages are enough, and the world will start acting as if the blockade is real. And that's exactly why Hormuz is so dangerous. You don't have to do the most to achieve the maximum amount of fear. And at the same time, there's another modern aspect that's pure poison for commercial shipping: jamming and spoofing navigation. Maritime safety warnings now openly mention probable global positioning system jamming and spoofing in the area. And in practice, this means that a ship doesn't know exactly where it is, can't navigate reliably, and the risk of collisions, accidents, and chaos increases. When this happens in a strait, where everything is squeezed into a few kilometers, the risk multiplies. And when the risk multiplies, the price multiplies as well. And here's the point: why Hormuz is so dangerous. Iran's weapon. Missiles and drones attack specific targets. Hormuz attacks the behavior of the entire system. It attacks insurers, shippers, prices, and trust. And that's why even countries that have nothing to do with the conflict suddenly have to deal with the same thing. Whether they can still plan deliveries, whether their commodities will arrive on time, and how much it will cost next week. And here it's not just about military prestige anymore, but about stability. And one more thing. Hormuz is a weapon that can hurt even Iran itself. That's why Iran uses it as leverage, not as a suicide mission. The most likely scenario is not a long-term complete closure, but rather an escalation of uncertainty so that it hurts everyone and increases the pressure for compromise. But when we already see stranded ships, damaged tankers, and insurance companies pulling out, this is not just an academic debate. This is an example of how the world can be taxed through a single strait. And right here is where it will be decided whether this becomes a short episode or a long crisis. And now when we have 4 layers of Iranian pressure on the table, missiles, drones, proxies, and Hormuz, there remains one last question that will decide whether this turns into a long marathon. How far will Iran go in escalating without crossing the point after which no one will forgive them? And this is where the final chapter begins. What does the most likely scenario of the coming days look like if Iran keeps pushing but tries not to trigger a total war? The most likely scenario in such conflicts is not usually one big turning point after which everything is decided. The most likely scenario is a series of steps, each day a bit tougher than the day before, but never so tough that either side can't claim they're still keeping the situation under control. That's exactly the mechanism that makes escalation so dangerous. Because when a conflict is made up of many small decisions, mistakes are almost certain. And when a mistake happens in an environment where rockets and drones are flying and tankers are crowded in the strait, the consequences can spread faster than diplomacy. And at that moment, people no longer care who was right, but who will stop it. In the case of Iran, it means that Tehran will most likely combine 3 types of pressure. The first is pressure on air defense through waves of missiles, which may not be massive but will be regular and aimed at making the opponent feel that it's not over yet. The second is persistent pressure through drones, which are ideal for forcing you to stay on alert longer than is comfortable and turning the conflict into a war of attrition. And the third is pressure through the sea, which today is not just a theory, but a reality, as we can already see that threats and incidents in the Strait of Hormuz can trigger a chain of insurance decisions, stranded ships, and economic nervousness. And this is a combination that can be maintained for a long time. In such a phase, it often turns out that the biggest weapon is neither a missile nor a drone, but the pace. Who can maintain the pressure longer? Who can better endure uncertainty? Who can better explain to their own audience why they should endure it? Iran is playing a dirty but logical game here. It doesn't want to stand in a direct military confrontation with the United States. It wants to create a situation where every day becomes a bit more risky and every week a bit more expensive until people start looking for a way to stop the conflict. And that's exactly why Hormuz is such a powerful lever. As the world grows more expensive, pressure to de-escalate comes from more than one side. It comes from all sides at once. What we'll decide now is whether Iran will stay below the threshold of total war or whether it will allow itself to be drawn into an escalation that could come back to hit it like a boomerang. If it starts attacking ships in a way that causes mass casualties among the crew, the risk of a strong international intervention increases. However, if it stays in the gray zone, threats, harassment, incidents, navigation interference, damage, and uncertainty, it may achieve what it wants without playing its last big card. And it is precisely in this gray zone where it will be decided whether the world will see a short episode or a long crisis. And now it's time to sum it all up in one sentence, so it's clear what this is about. Iran has 4 ways to hurt its opponents so that they feel it even beyond the battlefield. Missiles that exhaust defenses and keep countries on alert. Drones that turn it into a marathon and increase the risk of incidents. Proxy pressure that can spread uncertainty beyond Iran. And Hormuz, which can transfer the conflict into the world economy and turn it into a tax that everyone will start paying. And when you understand this, you suddenly realize that the most important question isn't who has the stronger air force. The most important question is who can control the escalation before it turns into something that no one will be able to stop. If you want this video to have a strong ending, here's the final thought. The most dangerous thing about this situation is not that someone wants a big war. The real danger is that no one wants a major war, yet everyone keeps pushing the limits, thinking one more step is still controllable. This is exactly how crises were born in history, which then no one could control. And that's why it's good to watch not the words, but the actions. Whether there will be more waves of missiles and drones, whether Hormuz will act as if it's closed even without an official blockade, and whether insurance decisions and stranded tankers will become the new normal. Because if that happens, then Iran's greatest weapon won't be on a launch pad anymore. It will be in the fact that it changed the world's behavior.
If you liked the video, I'd appreciate a like and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next ones I'm working on. You can support my work through a thank you, and if you want to help the video reach more people, click on praise. I appreciate it.